Walamani, welcome. My name's Ian Campbell from Palliative Care Australia in Canberra on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. Welcome to Thursdays at 3, our regular series of conversations with people living and working at the end of life. Our special guest today is the winner of the Lifetime Achievement Award at last year's National Palliative Care Awards, Dr. Geoff Mitchell. G'day, Geoff.
Hello, how are you?
Good, mate. Good. Thanks for making some time for us today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Geoff, you've been a GP in the Ipswich community in Queensland for almost 40 years, a busy academic as Emeritus Professor at the University of Queensland. And last Thursday, you retired. You're a week into retirement now. How are you feeling?
A little odd. I know it's the right time to finish. You just know, I guess. And the last thing I want to be is the guy on the team that they tap you on the shoulder and say it's time to go, pull you off the field. And I wanted to sort of finish at a time when I was working at my best, I think.
Geoff, let's reflect on your career as primarily as a GP for the Ipswich community in Queensland. Tell us about your community. Take us to Ipswich. What sort of a place is it? What sort of a community is it?
Well, it's a very interesting community. It's the oldest free settlement in Queensland. All the convicts are in Brisbane. And a guy called Alan Cunningham came through the Cunningham's Gap, which you may know, and found the Bremer River, found coal and found limestone. And in fact, its initial name was Limestone Hill. And it became a mining community. And as I say, it was the first free settlement. So it's quite old in Australian terms. It battled with Brisbane to become the capital. And Brisbane won, and I don't think they've ever really forgiven Brisbane for that. So it has a very strong community feel. But in early years, it was principally mining, and so back when there was no social security, if something happened, which it did too often, it was up to the community to look after the ones who were left behind. And that sense of community, that sense of self-sufficiency, is very strong in the community. So it's in the process of growing at 5% per annum, which is enormous. And the services are really struggling to keep up.
And Geoff, here you are with a GP career in the midst of all this change, in the midst of this growing community. Is it fair to describe you and your career as a bit of an old school GP in that you really offered that sort of cradle to grave service to the Ipswich community? Are you happy to be described as an old school GP?
Yeah, I am. I'm proud of it, actually. I went to Ipswich in 1984, and at that stage, the medical services were pretty limited. But Ipswich is 40 kilometres from the CBD of Brisbane, so think Penrith, I suppose.
Yep.
And it wasn't a sexy place. It was a mining town, and it was always hot or always too cold, and it just had this rough reputation, which has kept people away from it for a very long time. But the truth is that it's a gem. It's because of its independence and its community support, it is a wonderful place to work. And if you're a GP who was interested in everything, with not that many specialists, you ended up doing everything. So I delivered babies. I assisted at all the operations. There was a private hospital, and I had patients in there pretty well every day. So it's like a rural town at that point. It has grown, and the nature of general practice has changed enormously. And the other thing is, being so close to Brisbane, it's easier for medical staff to live in the outer Brisbane area and then come into Ipswich. So there's a kind of potential disconnect between the medical community and the community it serves. And I understand that. I'm actually part of that now. That when I moved to the UQ, I had to battle very heavy traffic getting in every day. And when I got a permanent job at UQ, I felt that I needed to be halfway between the two. So I'm one of those commuter GPs now, but my heart's in Ipswich, and I do an awful lot there.
Geoff, what would you say to, I guess, a new doctor, a medical student? There's such a need in rural and regional communities, and often there's a reluctance for medical students, for new doctors, new nurses to go to regional communities. What would you say to people? What's your sales pitch for a medical career in a regional community?
Do it. It's a brilliant opportunity to be the best GP or the best health professional you can. You're greatly appreciated. Your skills will be pushed. And if you're willing to push the boundaries and improve your skills as time goes on, then you've got a community that will let you do that, which is an amazing privilege. It really is. So you end up doing everything, and you end up being pretty good at everything, simply because if it's not you, it's who? No one. And the patient's very grateful, and that really hasn't changed, even though the specialist population's expanded enormously. It is still, it's a poor community, relatively speaking, and so private health services are not that available to most people in the communities, and the hospitals seriously stretched with the rapid growth and chronic underfunding for decades. So it's really, really catching up with everyone. So that throws a lot back on general practice. And again, it's up to you. How far do you want to push yourself? You're going to sit there and watch a patient who's already got a problem stew in that problem until they get their public health appointment, or are you going to do something about it? And that's pretty much what I've done my whole career. And so I've worked things up as far as I can. And sometimes you've had to be inventive while you're waiting and really push the boundaries. But, the patients get better by and large, and you realise that you actually do have the skills to do a whole lot more than you thought.
Geoff, what have been the tools you've drawn on during your career? As you say, you've taken that approach of doing something about it and developing new skills. What have been the tools that you've drawn on when you've found yourself in that situation of needing to do something, of wanting to do something for your patient, but you don't necessarily have had the experience or the skills? What have been the tools that you've drawn on? Well,
common sense. Your anatomy, your knowledge of anatomy and physiology, biochemistry. I guess I have a fairly visual brain, and so I picture what's going on, I guess. And so I can sort of see where the intervention needs to be. I think the other thing is, when you've got a complicated problem, you break it down into parts and then deal with each part. So, for example, with mental health, I use a three-dimensional graph in my mind, or I actually draw it out for the patients, with one axis being circumstances and one axis being personality and things you can't change about yourself, and then the third axis is medicine and biology. And so, most times you can define the total problem by the contributions of those three, and then you deal with each one of them. And the big advantage of that is that they can see that even if I put them on a pill, the other two need to be dealt with as well. And if they can't, then there's still a problem, but a better position to deal with it. Similarly with counselling, and you learn to make the best use of your the skills that you have, and you become more aware of the weaknesses and how to handle them.
Geoff, that holistic approach is very palliative care. How did you come to have an interest in palliative care?
I fell into it. The director of Lifeline in our community went to our church, and one day she said, "Oh, just thinking about developing some sort of service. Anything you see in the paper and you're reading about palliative care, can you give me a copy?" And so I gave her a copy of something, and next thing I'm the secretary of the Hospice Association. And that was 1986. And that lady was extraordinary. Her name was Hilda Desarts. She had a PhD in social work. She was a journalist. She was a German lady who was displaced during the war. She lost a daughter through leukemia. She just knew how to do things and how to lobby, and it kind of went from there. And there was a series of changes in the health system. Regionalisation was a big one, which brought the decision making closer to the community. And at the same time, we're thinking of how to make palliative, or how to work palliative care. And bit by bit, we worked up different. We educated, and we sort of worked out what was needed. And at the same time, the health department was in a position to listen and to contribute. And we ended up with a region-wide palliative care plan. Part of that was to develop a community-based hospice. So we raised the money, and it was opened in 1994, fully operational in 96. And it hasn't shut since. It's and most of the funding is actually community. The health department provides about, I believe, 45% of the funding, and the rest of it comes from the community.
Geoff, Ipswich, it feels like you've been early adopters of palliative care, or in many respects, and that palliative care has been part of Ipswich's growth over time. Yeah. Have you seen death and dying and those sort of end-of-life conversations play out better in Ipswich because of that presence, because of that history? Here we are in a death-denying society, but Ipswich seems to be ahead of the curve. Is that your experience?
Very much, yeah. I think the idea of having a region-wide plan was the key to it, and that was the initiative of the local health department. And it just, Ipswich, right, I don't know, finds or develops people with innovation. And so we built the second hospice in Australia that was independent of either a religious organisation or the local hospital. Another example is a woman who was a nurse at Ipswich Hospital who pitched the idea of advanced care planning, and actually having a nurse systematically going out and looking for people who didn't have an advanced care plan. And so when someone came in without one, for example, from a nursing home, the hospital gave her the permission to go to that nursing home and do one for every single resident.
Wow. Yeah.
And as far as I'm aware, that's the first time that's happened, and that's been taken up statewide and probably nationally. And things like that.
Geoff,
guidelines comes from Ipswich, basically, the palliative care book, because when the hospice was opened, it was a GP hospice, and there was no possible or no consensus about how to treat patients if it was going to be GP based. And we were told that and said it wouldn't work. Red rag to a bull. And so we developed guidelines, and if it wasn't in the guidelines, you didn't do it. And it was community-based, community-developed, and that morphed into therapeutic guidelines palliative care.
Geoff, what would you say to a GP or any health professional who is perhaps reluctant to step into that space of death, dying, and palliative care? It can be a confronting space, especially for health professionals who want to cure people in many respects. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but GPs, health professionals, nurses are humans, and as humans we tend to run from death and dying. Yeah. What would your advice be to primary health in particular to step into that space and play a role?
Well, if you're a GP, your mandate is to look after the whole person from start to finish. And that means the finish is part of that. And my experience has been that palliative care is, like you said, it's totally in line with good general practice. And as a result, if you see it like that, well, then there's no question, you just do it. But obviously things change, and I think the biggest change, and it's been a blessing and a curse, I think, has been specialisation. The specialty of palliative medicine came about in 1989, I think. I was at the meeting where that was agreed on, in Perth, and I could see there was going to be a problem because the same thing happened with obstetrics. GPs did normal obstetrics for decades, millennia, and then along comes specialists, and suddenly we don't know what we're doing because there's someone better down the road. Yeah. Are they better? By and large, if you're competent and you know when to bail out, then there's no reason why you can't do it. Similarly, here comes palliative medicine, and if there's a specialist to help you with your dying, then obviously you can't do it as well. And that's not true. Yeah. The other thing is that we've sort of equate palliative medicine or palliative care with the very end of life, and when it's dramatic and difficult and there's lots of distress and it's time consuming and all of that. But palliative care starts when you realise that the person's not going to get better, and that can be months or years away from the actual event. And palliative care specialty tends to be focused around cancer and neurodegenerative diseases, very end stage heart failure and the like. There's been figures that show that people who die over 70, which is pretty well all of us, 19% die of cancer. So do the maths, that's 81% don't. Who looks after them? Yeah. And if it's not palliative care, and I don't think they can, simply they're busy already with the 19%, it's everyone's business. And so the whole point of doing your job well is to do that part as well. And you can do it up to the point where your skills give out, and then that's when you bring your specialist in. And the corollary of that is, well, what are you going to do to improve your skills? And I've always thought that to do something, you have to want to do it. You have to have the skills to do it, or the tools, and you've got to have someone to support you when you're doing it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I've always seen education as a critical part of specialty palliative care. Hand-holding, if you like. I don't like that term, but encouraging people to give it a go, and then be available and to give advice when people need it. And that's what I've spent my professional life sort of developing and doing. I think there's things that stop that. One is the fear of medico legal risk, and feeling like if I make a mistake, someone's going to point the finger at me and I'm going to lose my registration, and that's wrong. It's inaccurate and it's wrong.
Geoff, just on that point, I'm keen to explore, I guess, the challenges of delivering palliative care in that primary health setting, and that history you've given around palliative care becoming a specialty is perhaps the backstory to the situation we find ourselves in now, where we need more GPs to be delivering palliative care, to have palliative care skills and stepping into that space. At the moment, Palliative Care Australia is surveying the workforce. There's a survey out there now asking people who want to be delivering palliative care or work in palliative care about, what are the barriers? What are the opportunities when it comes to delivering palliative care? What do you think the primary health sector will say? What will GPs say when it comes to the barriers for them to deliver palliative care?
Well, knowledge, fear. There's actually a paper that was outlines that from Joel Rhee, R-H-E-E. And that was done in 2012, I believe. But they managed to actually count people, get the opinions of people who didn't do it. And fear is right up there. Fear of lack of knowledge, and not doing house calls is something that is a real problem. And the gender balance of general practice is changing. It's far more females in general practice now, and they have family commitments, many of them. They also have safety concerns. And so, they find that they fear doing house calls, and the training actually makes it difficult from that perspective. Certainly the practice I worked at, they wouldn't let first term GP trainees do house calls. It was second half of the year, and you only had 6 months then. And that kind of mindset is a really big thing, and I get it, I really do. But I also know that if you choose your patient to do house calls with, and you do them mostly during the day, and you make yourself available at night, give people your phone number, and they never abuse it, never ever. Oh, sorry, that's not right. Almost never ever. There's always going to be one or two, but honestly, the number of times you get called is minuscule. And the fact that they've got that number and they've got that support available if they need it is hugely reassuring. And that's what they want. They want reassurance. People or carers in particular, need to know that they're not going to be left in an impossible situation. And so that number is, a lifeline to them, even though most of the time they don't need it. The other thing is you've got to plan ahead. You've got to think ahead. Okay, with this particular condition, what is going to be the problems? What will be the problems that are most likely to occur? And can I anticipate what they are and get ready for them? Give carers a plan. Say, for example, if a heart failure patient is breathless in the middle of the night, which they often are, how do you deal with that? Well, there are some really straightforward things you can do, and some medication that can be available that you can try, and you can often settle them down, and without the need to hit the panic button and call the ambulance at the first moment. And that's what people are doing. That's why people end up in hospital, and they don't really need to be, or many of them can have problems that can be dealt with at home.
Geoff, one of the other issues that the sector is dealing with at the moment are medicine shortages. Ordine in particular is a particular liquid morphine that's in short supply at the moment. And we're hoping that sort of by the end of August, the sector will be in a much better position, and supplies of Ordine in particular will be more secure. How have you been coping with that issue of medicine shortages and having what you know?
Excuse me. Well, there's medicine shortages in a lot of areas, and it's very rare that you only have one option. So you've got to use your imagination, I think, and you find alternatives. They may not be as ideal, but they are there, and you've just got to work through it. It's that decision, I'm assuming, was a commercial decision. They felt that they weren't making enough money out of it. They're a company, they're supposed to make money, so they pull out, and that happens all the time, car manufacturers, all that sort of thing, and so you're constantly adapting in every other part of life. You can't come up with solutions. Now, morphine is, or Ordine is a particularly useful drug because of its flexibility. And that is really the thing you're going to lose out on. You're not going to be as flexible with the options that you have, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Geoff, it was always an impossible task trying to cram your 40-year career into a 30-minute podcast. We haven't done you or your career justice. What next for you? What plans for retirement do you have?
I haven't got any plans at this stage. I've got some academic things that are still bubbling along. I'm sort of the useful idiot on a few projects. the representative GP, and that's been pretty much what my academic career has been about. I am involved in a number of charities and things that I'll continue to do that, and just wherever people feel that they need what I can offer, then that's what we'll do. There'll be a bit of travel in there. We have a son in England, so we will be travelling at least every year to catch up with him. Who knows? see what comes. That's
Geoffrey.
Right. Yeah. It won't be pipe and slippers, I can tell you that.
Geoff, thanks so much for spending this time today. Thank you for your service to the palliative care community and indeed the Ipswich community. You're a champion of both communities, and it's been great to spend this time with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Geoff Mitchell from Limestone Medical Centre in Ipswich and Emeritus Professor at the University of Queensland. Thanks so much for tuning in to Thursdays at 3 and engaging in matters of life and death. You'll find advice, tools and support at the Palliative Care Australia website, where you can also make a donation to support our work. See you next Thursday.